This Week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick. From Microbe TV, this is TWiV. This Week in Virology, episode 404, recorded on August 26th, 2016. This episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream, a subscription streaming service that offers over 1,500 documentaries and nonfiction series from the world's best filmmakers. Get unlimited access starting at just $2.99 a month. And for our audience, the first 2 months are completely free if you sign up at curiositystream.com/microbe and use the promo code microbe. This episode is also sponsored by Drobo, a family of safe, expandable, yet simple-to-use storage arrays. Drobos are designed to protect your important data forever. Visit drobo.com to learn more. On today's show, we are giving away copies of the recently published book, Virus, an Illustrated Guide to 101 Microbes, Incredible Microbes, by Marilyn Rusink. You have to keep listening to find out how to enter. I'm not going to tell you now, otherwise you'll just stop listening. You have to listen all the way to the end of the show. Hi, everybody. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you're listening to the podcast all about viruses. Joining me here in very hot and sultry New York City, Dickson, Despommier.
Hello, Vincent.
To you, it's nothing because you were born in New Orleans.
But I left soon after I was born because of the weather.
How was that, 7 years of age?
I was 1 year old.
So you don't have much of an accent.
I have no accent for that area of the world. That's true.
How would you characterize your accent? Do you have a New Jersey accent?
I was told that I have as Alan does also, a radio voice with unidentifiable regional.
I see. Neutral. Got it.
Neutral. It's neutral.
By the way, it's 32 Celsius here in New York City. We have 54% humidity.
Right.
And puffy clouds.
Right.
It's supposed to rain later. Is it going to rain, Dickson?
I hope so. We could use it.
Also joining us from Western Massachusetts, Alan Dove.
Good to be here. Pretty similar up here. We only have a 30% chance of rain, but if we do get it, it could be heavy rain because it tends to be thunderstormy in weather like this.
As long as it's not chocolate rain.
Or
wow, yeah, that's from a few years ago.
Cloudy with a chance of meatballs, perhaps.
You're so corny, Dickson.
That's a movie and a children's book. It's a great children's book.
Really corny.
Oh, that's the way I am.
Your pop culture references.
Hey,
that's the way you are. You know, that's right.
That is the way I am.
Also joining us from North Central Florida, Rich Condit.
Hi, everybody. How you doing?
3 weeks in a row for you, right?
Yeah, how about that?
Not
3
bad.
weeks in a row. I think all of them in Gainesville. How about that? That's scarcely itinerant.
You're staying put before you leave.
Yeah. We have weather very similar to yours. My little indoor-outdoor thermometer says that it's 89.
Right.
And that's just short of 32 Celsius, and it's 59% humidity, I think it said it was. So slightly more humid than your 59%, right? So,
yeah, but all around pretty similar, isn't it?
A very similar weather. And we got, partly cloudy skies. And I'm doing an experiment with my grandchildren who are here visiting. As a pick of the week some time ago, I picked the Galileo thermometer that sits on my desk.
Mm-hmm.
That has the floaty balls in it.
Yeah.
And so they wanted to know how it worked. So I told them, and then we stuck it in the refrigerator for a while, and then we put it outside to make sure that it works the way it's supposed to.
And did it?
So far, so good. But I hope what they come out of with this is a good idea of experiments and controls.
Yeah.
Oh.
Controls, dude. Controls. Yeah. Controls are my life.
Well, they used to be anyway. I guess you could still have controls.
Listen, the most important thing I learned throughout all of this is critical thinking.
Richard, you have children. You have no control.
True. A fundamental component of critical thinking is controls. As a matter of fact,
yeah, that's true.
We're selling a house. This is getting off track.
Really?
This is TWiV, right? We're selling a house. So what do? They do a radon inspection.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Okay? And we got a reading first time around that was just like a smidge above the EPA minimum level. The EPA minimum level is 4, and I believe the units are picocuries per liter of air. And our reading was 4.1. So what do? You do it again. That's what you do.
Right.
And so they used a different method of measuring. It's a different company. Yes. And they come in and they got these scintillation vials that they put around the house. And I think what they do is my assumption is that they equilibrate with the air in the house.
Right.
Okay, so you wind up with radon in the vial and you cap it off and you send it off to some company that counts them, right? So they come in and the first thing my wife says is, how do I know that those vials are cold now? Right? Can you show me the controls? And the woman says, controls?
Yeah, that's good.
Well, it would be easy, though, wouldn't it, to take one vial open and right next to it have a closed vial and do that all around?
Very, very good experiment,
Number them
Dickson.
1A, 1B, 2A, 2B.
Absolutely.
Hey, listen, I spent 28 years in the lab.
Well, you want to know the background.
I finally learned the meaning of controls.
I hadn't thought of that one as the control, but that would be an appropriate
perfect
control
to do, right?
Mm-hmm. What happens if it remains at 4.1? What do you have to do? Remediation?
Put a little fan in your cellar.
First of all, it's up to the buyers whether or not they want to do the mitigation.
That's right.
And what they do is in a house, because we're on a slab.
You have no basement.
Sits over sand. We have no basement.
Oh,
right, it's Florida.
So what they do is they go into about 3 different points in the house, and they drill a hole in the concrete slab that goes through the slab, and they run a pipe down into that so that the open end of the pipe is flush with the bottom of the slab.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pipe goes up into the attic, and the pipes from the 3 parts of the house join together, and they have a big fan on that, and the fan exhausts it out the top.
Sure.
So it's basically sucking air through the underneath of the slab and essentially venting it and shooting it out the roof. And apparently that's quite effective.
It is.
And if we stick in 3 of those, it costs $3,600 and it takes care of the problem. But it's really up to the sellers, the buyers, whether or not they want to do it. For 4.1 relative to 4, are you kidding me?
Yeah, I wouldn't.
But they got 18-month-old twin girls and a 6-year-old boy. You know the parenting thing. If something were to happen and you hadn't done this, how would you feel? Right? So
tell them the radon is good, by the way, because without it, our thermonuclear reactor in the center of the Earth would stop, and then the magnetic field would stop, and then our atmosphere would disappear.
Oh, that's comforting.
4.1 is not going to make any biological difference.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
I don't even know what number would.
3.9 would.
So that's what I wanted to know. That's what I wanted to know. If you look on Wiki about radon, it's very good, and it tells you all about it's a 2 or 3 steps in the decay process from either thorium or uranium, which are natural constituents of the soil. Right. And it's gaseous and it's radioactive, blah, blah, blah. And apparently there is good epidemiologic evidence that radon is a significant cause of lung cancer in the U.S. Probably, and I don't know about globally, but probably the second leading cause of lung cancer. Of course, if you get rid of all the tobacco lung cancers,
it's trivial.
And the second leading cause is almost trivial, but it's not insignificant.
So we have one of the leading experts on radon at Columbia School of Public Health. His name is David Brenner. If you'd like me to get in touch with you, I'd be glad to do that.
Tell him what he thinks about. Ask him what he thinks about 4.1. My question was. So in order to collect epidemiologic data, what they must have, I envision a map of the U.S. that has various radon readings around and incidence of lung cancer, and there must be some sort of correlation between excess radon and lung cancer.
Yeah, but I want to know.
Rich, I want to know what the radon levels are when you see a statistically significant increase in the levels of radon. My guess is
above 4.0.
Yeah. Thanks.
What's
Alan.
the standard deviation on that?
Actually, the standard deviation is quite small.
So radon is so ephemeral as to where it's found that you could have one house with a very high reading and the next house over could have nothing.
The woman who did the radon test says you can have a house that has one reading 1 year and 10 years later it's a very different reading.
What do you think it is in Italy right now?
Yeah, it's stirred up is what
That's
it is.
Exactly right. But the point is that
for those just joining us, welcome to This Week in Radiology.
That's right. You couldn't, Rich, you can't make a map of the United States based on the way radon behaves.
No, because it's going to move around. Right.
Well, not only that, it's like every other house almost.
Yeah.
Especially New Jersey. New Jersey has a lot of radon.
Okay.
Are we done?
You can cut all this out if you want to.
No, I will leave it in. Too hard, too much work to cut it out.
Right. You could begin again if you'd like.
No, it's fine. We have some follow-up. The first one is from Rich Condit. What do you got?
Okay. So we have other follows up about the FluMist thing that we talked about last time. So there's been what we talked about last time was an ACIP. What's ACIP again? The Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which is a part of CDC, who have said that they are disadvocating the use of the nasal live attenuated influenza vaccine, FluMist, this year because a recent clinical study showed it to be ineffective. But as we looked into this, there are some discrepancies. Now, I have my first graduate student. I've mentioned this before some time ago. My first graduate student worked at Aviron when they were just starting the development of FluMist, and I think had a significant amount to do with working up the first batch of FluMist, putting the whole thing together in the technical end of putting it all together for the first clinical trials. And so when Aviron got bought by MedImmune, he became a director of biological quality control at MedImmune. And now since MedImmune has been purchased by, what is it?
AstraZeneca.
It's still MedImmune, but it's a part of AstraZeneca. He's now no longer the FluMist guy. He's working in a different part of biological control, but he has been heavy-duty FluMist for years. I asked him for his spin on this, and he gave me a rap, which I won't read, but he gave a link to an FDA article which effectively says the same thing. And it's an article that we can put in the show notes. It's called FDA Information Regarding the FluMist Quadrivalent Vaccine. And it basically says that FDA continues to find that the benefits of FluMist Quadrivalent outweigh any potential risks, blah, blah, blah. And now gives a summary of scientific studies. Now I want to read this. As of June 22nd, 2016, ACIP, as of the June 22nd ACIP meeting, data were presented on influenza vaccine effectiveness from 4 observational studies conducted in subgroups of the pediatric population during the 2015-2016 influenza season. 2 of the studies were conducted in the U.S., one by MedImmune as a part of its post-marketing commitment to FDA, and one by the CDC. A 3rd study was conducted in the U.K., and a 4th study was conducted in Finland. Based on the presentations of the ACIP meeting for influenza A H1N1, 4th study was conducted by Finland, in Finland. Okay, so based on the presentations at the ACIP meeting for influenza A H1N1, both U.S. studies showed lower effectiveness for the quadrivalent compared to inactivated. Neither U.S. study showed statistically significant effectiveness of FluMist Quadrivalent against influenza A H1N1. However, 3 of the studies, MedImmune, UK, Finland, showed statistically significant effectiveness of FluMist Quadrivalent against all influenza strains, ranging from 46 to 58%. So they're making a distinction here. They're making a distinction between the effectiveness against H1N1 specifically and the effectiveness against all the 4 strains combined. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Right. You're hearing me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. So basically, the bottom line is that the U.S. studies show a reduced effectiveness against H1N1, but 3 of the 4 studies, excluding the CDC study, showed effectiveness against all of the vaccine strains. So there's one outlying study, and that's the CDC study. And and these are all with the quadrivalent strains. Reasons for the discordant results are not clear, may include limitations inherent in the observational study designs. One of the things that they bring up is thermolability of the strains. Okay? And apparently the H1N1 in particular vaccine is somewhat thermolabile, and MedImmune has been doing some stuff to some new protocols to improve on the thermostability of that. And so, one hypothesis is that maybe in shipping or something like that, the batch that was used by CDC experienced some higher than normal temperatures, and so that's an outlying study. But at any rate, generally, it looks like, and we already said this, that the H1N1 component is more thermolabile and a little wimpy, but 3 out of 4 studies say that globally, in terms of inoculation against all of the strains, that the FluMist is okay. And
right, it's comparable to the inactivated vaccines.
Right, okay. So all of this apparently has to do with one study done by CDC which showed ineffectiveness, and everybody's trying to figure out why that was. And there's
one study done by CDC that showed it was ineffective across the board, plus a few other studies that showed that it was not effective against H1N1.
Correct.
Right.
And the H1N1, well, they're trying to understand the discrepancies, and they're trying to improve on the H1N1 problem.
Right.
It's interesting to notice that the original FluMist was approved on 2003, all right, and then eventually expanded to include younger children. It was originally 5 through 49 years of old, and this was based on pre-licensure data showing that it was as effective as an activated vaccine. In 2012, FDA approved quadrivalent FluMist, and they say the effectiveness was based on an evaluation of immune responses in vaccinated persons, as well as the demonstrated effectiveness of the trivalent formulation.
Right.
So it doesn't look like they did effectiveness on the quadrivalent back in 2012 for that licensure.
Right. I think that basically the FDA said we know enough about this.
Yeah, right.
So that we don't, we're going to go ahead and license this without the clinical data. But MedImmune promised at the time to do clinical studies post-licensure, which is ongoing at this point.
Correct.
Right, because they had years of data showing this was safe and that it was effective in the trivalent formulation. The only change was the addition of a 4th strain, and so they treated it as a kind of an alteration of the existing product rather than an entirely new product.
Got it.
Right. And last week we had some discussion because some of the trials that we discussed used trivalent, some of them used quadrivalent, and we thought, well, maybe it was a quadrivalent, but according to this FDA report, they're comparing 4 studies with quadrivalent, and they see a discrepancy among those. So it's probably not the difference between the tri and the quadrivalent. It's something specific with the studies that are going on.
Did you just drink some coffee, man?
I was going to ask that question, actually.
Wait, all of a sudden you sped up.
Yes.
I want to get it all in before my my audio goes out again.
All right. John writes, Dear Professors, in TWiV 403 you discussed some data comparing FluMist to the flu shot. Might a rational person simply decide to get both vaccines? Puzzled John.
A rational person who doesn't mind paying for them because their insurance company is going to use this as an excuse for not covering FluMist? Sure.
Would you be able to get both? I guess you could. I'm not sure. I looked, and there's no recommendation for
What's
taking
the expense difference?
Well, you can get a regular shot for $6 at CVS, right?
Go on.
I don't know.
Or
what
you can get
is.
it. You can get it for free at a lot of. I mean, my town does a public flu shot. Yeah, public flu shot clinic. You get it for free if you They ask for your insurance card if you have one, but
I don't know how much.
So what would the difference be if you got the FluMist as well?
The price?
Yeah.
I don't know. But, if you got them both at the same time or very
Is it like an
close
EpiPen
together,
difference or just a regular difference?
No, it's not. It's not ridiculous. I actually ended up paying for it out of pocket 1 year so my daughter could get it rather than the injected. Because at that time, we believed that it was superior to the inactivated vaccine.
Yes,
and it may yet be.
So we're in belief systems. We're not a belief system, are we? We're evidence-based.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, we believe based on evidence. So at the time, the evidence said, I trust that the evidence said.
That's right.
Yeah.
You could get both at once, but if you get them too far apart, the immunity generated by one would interfere with the other vaccine. So otherwise, you could, but I don't think there's any reason to. There's something is at issue with the trials the way they're done, as you just heard. So wouldn't worry about.
Yeah, I would say get whichever one you normally get, and I normally get the shot because it's free. And if the pediatrician is offering FluMist, my daughter may get that. But I'm pretty sure that they're not going to be offering it since the CDC is not recommending it.
All right, Les writes, Dear twiVivants.
Oh, yeah.
Since error 404 on the web means not found, how about each person come up with a short list of things that are not known, but you would be most thrilled to have discovered? All right. We've got Dickson. Can you come up with one, because we have a list each, and then we'll wait for you at the end. Okay.
I'll do some thinking on this.
All right. So I would like to know how viruses are good for us, and what functions do they provide? How is it that for some viruses there's one serotype and multiple for the others? What controls that? What is the selective pressure leading to specific genome types, like DNA versus RNA, segmented, single? We'll talk about that a little bit today. However, most of all, I would like to know what was the first virus on Earth and what other planet has viruses. See, if I could discover that, I could have gone to that planet. Rich Condit, what about you?
My answer to this is not necessarily virology, but the first thing that comes to mind is that I really want to know if there's life on other planets. I assume there is because the universe is so big, but I'd really love to know that and see what it was like. If so, what sort of form, and in particular, what sort of biochemistry it has. I mean, if we found DNA on another planet, that would change everything.
Yes.
I'd also like to know the details of the evolution of life on Earth. You can do the is it the Urey experiment where you create a primitive Earth's atmosphere and zap it, and you can get all sorts of organic stuff, and then you can Urey and Miller, and then you can think about self-replicating RNA, I suppose. But I want to know, there's a lot of missing pieces in that, and I'd like to know what that was. Also, when you retire, I had stuff going on. I got research problems that I won't go into that I was interested in that I'll probably never know the answers to. And I'd really like to know where all that was going. Dang.
Interesting. Alan Dove.
Well, there's some overlap here. I mean, a couple of years I looked at, I said, yeah, definitely. I would want to know if are there viruses or life on other planets. But I'd like to know if there's any organism that we can find that doesn't or hasn't been infected with viruses. And then what was the first type of virus to arise? Was it an RNA virus from the RNA world, or did it have to wait for the arrival of cells? And then a pair of questions I've been wondering about for a while, especially with these giant viruses that have been discovered. Is there a virus that began as a free-living organism and simplified itself down to become an intracellular parasite and then a virus? Conversely, has any virus ever managed to evolve to become a free-living organism?
Roger that.
That brings us to you, Dickson.
It does. So just having had an infinite amount of time to think about this, but I've been thinking about this a lot anyway. I used to recommend a book to my students called Diversity of Life by E.O. Wilson. And in it, of course, he begins by saying the cornerstone and the keystone for understanding ecology is to know what a species is. So I would love there to be an ironclad undisputable definition of a species, because without it, defining ecological relationships is nearly impossible. And I would also love to know all of the impacts of the essential niche on a given species. That is to say, every single influence that can be measured. I would like to be able to measure that. And I'm thinking now in terms of the worm that I used to work on, Trichinella, sitting in a muscle cell deep inside of a mammalian host, waiting for the host to die so it can be swallowed to start the next generation. How in the hell does this parasite sit there for that long a time, and it could be years, by the way, without being essentially altered in a way which allows the host to live a natural life as well? So those are really burning questions. I agree with Richard. You have a lot of stuff that's unresolved when you retire that you would still like to see the answers to. And so all of the sticosome secretions of this worm, I would love to know what each one does and how it does it and where it does it and that sort of thing.
Okay. There you go, Les.
We'll answer more of that question next time.
No, that's a good question.
It's an excellent question.
We could do a whole episode on it.
Yeah, there's a lot of 404s.
And who would you want? Who would you want at the dinner table to discuss this with you?
Right.
I'd like to have Albert Einstein.
Right.
Are you asking that question, Alan?
No. That's the other. That's the Varmus question that we were doing.
Right.
Yeah. It's funny because I met Peyton Rouse once, and I was told that he was a curmudgeon-y old man who was rather bitter over the fact that it took so long for the Connecticut Medical Society to elect him as a member. So he might have spent the whole dinner curmudgeoning about why it took so damn long for them to recognize him. He had to win a Nobel Prize.
There are people who you might want at the dinner table at a particular time in their life. You might want to pick the age before they got bitter.
I would love to have dinner with Jacques Pepin. And if you could bring back Julia Child, I'd like both of them at my dinner table. I love the way they interact with each other. So
Johnny sent us a New York Times obituary of D.A. Henderson, who died last Friday as we were recording TWiV. Unfortunately, the epidemiologist who was in charge of the smallpox eradication campaign. And in the middle of this week, I posted a TWiV special of an interview I did with him a couple of years ago.
Nice.
So check that out.
He was 87. Died in Towson, Maryland.
Yeah.
Wow.
Survived by his nemesis.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, he wanted to. He was one of the major guys who wanted to nuke the remaining stocks of smallpox. And, although I have not been in favor of that, in a way, I'm sorry he didn't get to see that happen because he was passionate about it, and he did as much or probably more than as much, at least, as anybody to rid the planet of that disease. And it's too bad he didn't get to see the last bits go, I suppose. There you go.
At the end of my talk, I asked him if he thought we could eradicate polio. The answer will surprise you. Check it out. Alan, can you take Tom's email?
Tom writes, "Greetings to the Merry Twixters. A couple of questions about the Canadian vaccine effectiveness study of a Hutterite community. Toward the end of your discussion, you mentioned the lack of a control group, but at the outset, it was stated that 70% of the possible study subjects were vaccinated. I wonder if they could look at the other 30% remaining as a control group. I'm interested in long-term virus sequelae. I had chickenpox as a child, and now I'm curious to see if I get shingles."
Well, unless you get a shingles vaccine, you might.
Should we address the control group first?
Yes. Can you use that as a control?
I don't see why not. I think that's a good idea.
Unless there's some geographic difference.
Right. Or
70% were vaccinated because they live over here, and the other 30%.
Or 30% were not vaccinated because they had some contraindication, which would be a high percentage. It sounds like that might be a good control group.
Yeah.
Certainly a good idea.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then additionally, I'm wondering what to think about post-polio syndrome. In 1952, I contracted polio. Fortunately, it was a mild case with unilateral flaccid paralysis that was gone in a few months. I've heard of PPS, post-polio syndrome, but I'm not sure if it's anything I should be concerned about.
Well, you could be concerned or not. Either way, there's nothing.
Yeah,
you can do
you
about
could choose to be concerned about it.
If I were you, I wouldn't worry about it because it's just one more thing to worry about. And if it's happening, you can get therapy and so forth. But I think, what is it, about a quarter of people with polio go on to develop post-polio syndrome.
Remind us what post-polio syndrome is.
So you get polio at some point in your life, typically as a young person. You recover with therapy. You recover the use of your limbs. You have a normal life. And then 30, 40 years later, you suddenly begin to lose limb function again.
Oh, my goodness.
And it's called post-polio syndrome because it has nothing to do with virus being present, but it looks like, with polio, you've lost a number of neurons, and then as you age, you lose more, and you don't have
them to spare.
As many because of spare, and that. And a number of people are still doing this, of course, because we're still in the era when there were lots of polio cases 30, 40 years ago. But, I wouldn't worry about it.
Well, telling him that isn't going to help because someone wants to find human beings as the only animal in the world that spends half of its time worrying about things that will never happen.
Other animals might worry too.
We don't know
but
about
we just don't know it.
Well, they certainly don't look worried. How's that?
It depends on the animal. I've known some nervous dogs, for example.
Dogs are pretty high strung. I agree, but I look at the natural world.
How sad.
I love nature shows, and I watch these animals being hunted down, and then they don't get caught, and then they go right back to feeding.
There are a lot of animals that look nervous, for sure.
I could not eat after an event.
They're worried about you eating them, Dickson.
Perhaps.
Yeah, actually, yes. Just about every rodent I've ever seen has looked nervous.
Right.
They are just genetically nervous. The rabbits in the yard, the groundhogs, everything.
Well, they're on red alert.
Right, so they're permanently worrying about things. Although in their case, they're worrying about things that most likely will happen.
That's right. Exactly.
So this is something that it could happen. It might not, and I would try to just the one good thing to point out here in Tom's case, it sounds like the polio that he had was a lot less severe than what a lot of people got. And what seems to happen with post-polio syndrome, what happens with polio in general, people get the disease and then very commonly recover partially. So you'll get paralysis, maybe you're paralyzed from the waist down, and then you gradually regain the ability to walk, maybe with a cane or something. Or you completely recover. So that is a fairly typical course of the disease. And then, as Vincent said, when you get old, we all start losing neurons, and if you have fewer to spare, then you may find that you gradually lose some ability in the same place that was paralyzed when you had polio. If you had a fairly mild flaccid paralysis, might start seeing the same thing again, or you might not. Or, by that time you might have a stroke and get unilateral paralysis that has nothing to do with polio. So you can choose what you worry about.
Or you might get in
a car accident and not worry about it at all.
Which is more likely than anything, if I understand.
So continuing, we've just come out of a strange mid-August monsoon in central Texas. Our ranch east of Austin, as of yesterday, had accumulated 15.8 inches of rain. The pastures are lush and the cows are happy. Currently in Austin, it's 80 Fahrenheit, 27 C, 86% humidity. Dew point is 75 Fahrenheit, looking to a high this afternoon of 92 Fahrenheit. Ow. My goodness.
Well,
this is where you're moving, Rich.
Yeah, but now listen. Wait a minute. Actually, I've been watching the weather, and of course I have. My daughter lives there. It's actually quite similar. It says 86% humidity. Where is he? That's at 80 degrees Fahrenheit. See, that's the problem.
It's supposed to be raining.
Important thing is the dew point. 75 degrees.
Dew point was 75. That's a pretty high dew point.
That's a pretty high dew point, but it's it's about what it is here.
Yeah.
75. That's just summertime, dude.
Well, Rich, you ought to go check out Tom's ranch.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, we could do an episode in that area. There's Rich will be in Austin, Tom's ranch, and then Buda is probably not far away, right?
Kind of a barbecue.
Maybe we ought to go there. Maybe we should all go there for episode 500.
There you go.
Right?
We can record episode 500 at Central Market near the gelato stand and have Neva as a guest.
There we go.
Okay? Or we could record it in
Tom,
Buda. There's a really nice little funky Mexican restaurant there.
Well, they have a lot of good music places, at night there. We could go to one of them and say, hey, would you like to have us instead of a band that night?
Tell us to.
And they'd go,
Right,
no, probably
Ride
not.
the artificial bull there, Vince.
Actually, I'm going to live about 10 minutes from Neva.
Okay.
Yeah, good. Very
So
good.
finishing Tom's letter, we still haven't gotten through the follow-up, and we're half an hour into the show. We're off to a great start here. Once again, thanks for the opportunity to support Twix through Patreon. I figure it's $10 a month well spent. Tom in Austin, who signs as Polio Class of 52. I like that.
Oh, brother.
All right. Rich Condit, can you take Hannah's
Hannah
email?
writes, greetings, TWiV crew. First off, I just wanted to say I thoroughly enjoy your podcast. I found it and TWiM when looking for a way to keep my microbiology knowledge current after finishing grad school. I wait anxiously each week for the latest installment, and I've been perusing older episodes in the meantime, all the while making my hour-plus commute to and from work bearable and informative. This week's episode, It's Not Easy Being Vaccine, TWiV 403, was of particular interest to me. I found the section on CDC's advisement against FluMist vaccine especially interesting, as I know it's the only non-injectable flu vaccine on the market, which provides a great option for children and the severely vaccine-phobic adults.
It actually is kind of a shot.
In a way.
Yeah, it's a little syringe, and it's, up the nose. Anyway, continuing.
Hey, we call the shots that are in glasses.
It could be a flu snot.
It's a flu snort is what it is.
Yes.
I did a little of my own research on it and found a few interesting articles that only add to the questions you addressed in the podcast. I found an NPR article. She says, I believe it's the same one you found on the show, and that's the case, that summarized the Canadian study you mentioned, but it did point out that the vaccine tested in Canada was trivalent FluMist vaccine and not the currently produced in the U.S. quadrivalent version. The NPR article also mentioned that CDC data consistently showed the live naval vaccine to be very effective in children until 2013, when the vaccine went from including 3 strains trivalent to including 4 strains quadrivalent. Does going from trivalent to quadrivalent vaccine usually have an impact on the efficacy of a viral vaccine? I would say that we don't have enough data to say whether there's usually an effect. I don't think we really know. And in this particular case, I don't think that that's the really smoking gun.
But there are certainly many examples of multivalent vaccines that have increased in valency over the years, and it hasn't.
Right.
Well, but part of increasing them in valency, to make measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, Hilleman didn't just take one of each and put them together into the same vial. There was actually some tinkering that had to occur to make sure that the ratios were right, and you didn't, And with polio, you've got to adjust the strain concentrations correctly. But with flu, it seems very unlikely that that's the problem.
So just in with respect to this question, turns out that measles, mumps, rubella has recently been modified to include the chickenpox vaccine. So they obviously had to do studies to balance that. And that's one of the licensed ones out there besides chickenpox vaccine.
Right, and in fact, the IPV, the polio vaccine, the injected polio vaccine, got combined into one of the other. DPT, I think it's now DPT IPV that kids get, that my daughter got. So, yeah.
I would really, as a reminder, like to get somebody on the show who can speak to the chickenpox vaccine and the shingles vaccine.
Yes. Yeah. I'm working on it.
Continuing on, I also found a review article published in 2015 that claims LAIV influenza vaccines, those are the live attenuated influenza vaccines, are effective in its abstract the article, but I was unfortunately unable to read the article as it was not available through my university's library. Even the University of Florida library, I couldn't get that one. I then found 2 2016 studies that show live influenza vaccines are only effective against influenza B, influenza A, or Yamagata influenza, and not against the 2009 pandemic H1N1, which I believe you said was the dominant strain last season. And clearly we've identified H1N1 as being problematic in all of this, and in particular the thermal lability of that strain being a problem, and MedImmune, as we have said, is working on protocols to improve that, and apparently preliminary studies at least indicate that those protocols are improving the effectiveness. The other thing was, in the history of this workup that I forgot to mention from the CDC article, is that some years back, I think we talked about this, there was a mismatch on an H3 strain, okay, that reduced the overall effectiveness of those vaccines. But that's nobody's, everybody's trying to monitor what's coming down the pike. That just happens. The first study looked to be done through CDC, and the second through AstraZeneca itself in conjunction with 3 medical schools. So
I think these are a couple of the studies discussed in the FDA document.
Yes, I believe that's correct. I look forward to updates on this topic, as it's quite interesting. On your third topic of the show, the varicella zoster vaccine, I'm also quite interested. I was one of the first children vaccinated in my area in 94, 95, and I did not contract chickenpox. Obviously, at age 25 and healthy, I'm not quite in the risk group for shingles zoster yet, but I am interested to see what happens in the next few years with studies concerning this, as well as in the next 30 years or so when people my age enter the risk group for shingles. I can't know if I am still immune to chickenpox, as I am not around children, but I do have friends close to my age that are school teachers and appear to have maintained their vaccinated immunity to the virus, as they have not contracted chickenpox from their students. Not that there's going to be a whole lot of chickenpox in the school system now. That's hardly a scientific study, but I would be very interested to see an actual study on those of us in the initial mainstream vaccination group. You also mentioned doing part of a show on the subject. Please do. I'd love to hear what your experts think. So I think we ought to do what we can, as we've already said.
Definitely.
Signing off from cloudy Boulder, Colorado, where it's currently 78 Fahrenheit, 25 C, and looks as though our daily afternoon thunderstorm is arriving closer to lunchtime. Thanks, Hannah. Very nice letter.
All right. Good. Hey, Dickson, can you take Diane?
Now, this one was translated from the French through Google Translate.
Yeah, so it's a
reads
little
sketchy.
Try to
so you want to do it in French, Dickson?
I could, yes. Good evening, everybody.
No.
I can do it in a French accent, but I can't do it in French. Okay, so Diane writes, translated from French, having acquired polio at the age of 6.
Don't substitute words.
Why? That's what she
Google
meant.
did.
Let's go with Google Translate.
I'll read it to you just the way it is.
Read it.
Having reached polio at the age of 6, I had just started school in Lévis, Quebec, Canada, in September 1960, before the last polio outbreak in Quebec. I reached for his legacy of its post-polio syndrome today, 30 to 40 years after the acute phase. Therefore, I have become disabled since my 58 years, and to this day am 62 years old, and I have a severe phenomenon, rotoscoliose, very painful, and still limits me from month to month. And I started a book on the subject, but fatigue and the effect of drugs kidnap me momentum. The passion is still there, but the exhaustion, pain, extreme heat of our summer is limiting my breath with my physical deconditioning because less active cannot walk more than 15 to 20 minutes. I get involved in the continuing to do my research on the possible treatment of post-polio syndrome exists. Thank you for reading my comment, and thank you for all your information. Is very useful to me. A victim, a survivor.
Look at that. It's perfect segue to the previous letter.
Yes.
30 to 40 years after her polio, acute polio, she got post-polio. And not having a good time with it, right?
I like the Google Translate is, well, you get it, but I like in particular, kidnap me momentum.
Yes.
Yeah.
It kidnaps your momentum. That's it. Yeah.
Well, best to you, Diane. I'm sorry to hear.
We wish you the best of luck.
Those issues.
Yep.
All right, we got a letter from Nick Atchison,
Nick
who retired virologist he was up at McGill, right? And he used to write us now and then. He writes, "Hi guys, your discussion in TWiV 403 on the waning efficacy of varicella vaccine against the appearance of zoster in people over 60 to me is a bit scary. If this is the same vaccine given to children but in higher dose to adults and its efficacy is reduced to near zero after 10 years in adults, what about children vaccinated with this strain?
Question.
Are they losing their immunity to chickenpox 10 years after vaccination? If so, they are now in danger of being infected with varicella virus as teenagers or adults, and this is a much more dangerous disease when first acquired as an adult. Is there any information on the lasting efficacy of varicella vaccination of children over time? I would be a bit surprised if this had not been done, but of course, these are expensive and complicated studies to do.
There is that information.
So I found an article from this year that summarizes this. I mean, the most recent study is not immediate, but they say studies have proven that the varicella vaccine is both well-tolerated and efficacious, and 97% of children displayed detectable antibody titers 7 to 10 years after vaccination. So that's 7 to 10 years. It's not, longer, but it's not bad.
Right.
This is a question that also Hannah had earlier, whether, her immunization is lasting. Of course, we're not that far out because, as Hannah said, the vaccine was first used in,
94, 95?
95.
And so, we're not that many years out yet, so we have to keep looking. Obviously,
but that's part of the typical post-marketing types of requirements that are usually applied to these sorts of things. And so people are periodically checking the earlier cohorts that got this to see when the immunity wears off. As far as the studies we were talking about last time, these are people who got the shingles vaccine. They were already in the elderly classification, I guess. And as we age, our immunity declines. And this is a very well-documented phenomenon with, say, flu vaccines. In fact, there are now flu vaccine formulations that are essentially just double potency, extra concentrated virus, killed virus for the injected vaccine for elderly people getting the vaccine, because it's already been seen that they don't generate as robust an immune response. So this is just essentially the same thing happens with the chickenpox vaccine. They don't generate as robust an immune response as a kid who's getting it.
All right, Nick continues, I figure you can find these studies faster than I can. I've kind of switched out of virology and am now at the end of a fascinating ornithology congress in Washington, D.C. I gave a paper on the songs of red-eyed vireos that I have been recording for the last 3 summers nearby my home in Montreal.
So you're in vireology.
Since I'm a long-time bird watcher, this career shift isn't fully unexpected, but it is exhilarating to be exposed to fantastic scientific studies on communication, speciation, evolution, sexual behavior, etc. of birds. In my amateur presentation on the highly individual singing behavior of red-eyed vireos, tied for the 6th most abundant bird in North America, with an estimated population of 130 million, of which 80 million are in Canada during the breeding season, was well received. A very open scientific community. And I get the impression that rivalries and publication scooping are not so prevalent as they still are in the medical and molecular biology
They have
areas.
a clearer pecking order.
Well, there's less at stake because there's no money for that research.
They still are, Nick. They still are prevalent. It was hot and humid today in the D.C. area, but a heavy afternoon thunderstorm cooled us all down. Regards, a lapsed TWiV listener, but I tune in now and then. Obviously, you did listen because you know the weather shtick.
Well, it's good to hear from Nick, and I'm glad to hear he's doing well in retirement and has found an avocation with his bird watching. That's terrific.
Yeah.
It makes me think, we hear birds tweet and we think, oh, how happy the birds are. What a nice song. And they're probably saying, get out of my tree.
I believe that's exactly
Talk about nervous. Talk about nervous. Birds display nervous behavior, right? Looking all around, looking up and down, left and right, jumping from limb to limb. Oh, my gosh. What's the problem? I don't blame them. They're going to get eaten any moment by another bird,
cat.
Right? Zika sit rep. 36 cases so far in Florida. I understand that there's now some spread locally in Miami Beach in addition to Wynwood.
Correct.
36 is not a lot, right?
Nope.
If this were Brazil, it would be thousands and thousands. So it just goes to show the transmission dynamics are different here. Interesting article in JAMA pediatrics, they estimate that between 5,900 and 10,300 pregnant women in Puerto Rico will be infected with Zika virus between this summer and next. And they estimate these pregnancies will result in between 1 and 300 babies with microcephaly.
So what was I got to figure out the percentage there. We were talking about 13% of infected.
Between 1 and 13%.
Okay. Right. Okay.
All right, we have a letter from Patricia. I think Alan is next up here. Can you take
Sure. Patricia writes, "Greetings, TWiV folks. As a biological anthropologist by training, I've enjoyed your periodic discussions of generalized terms to use when referring to mixed-sex, multiple gender-identified groups. I often send blanket emails to my classes with hi folks or hi all, and have found those work fairly well. I should be working on syllabi for fall classes as they begin next week, but instead I'm writing this email. I've greatly enjoyed becoming more informed about viruses through listening to this podcast and TWiVo, more of my direct interests. I came across this article attached in one of my online feeds and thought I could share it as a listener pick regarding Zika infection. It shows through radiography, magnetic resonance, MR, and tomography scans of fetal and postnatal brain development, the effect of Zika infection has on the developing brain. The images are graphic and not for the faint of heart, but clearly show anencephaly and other brain tissue abnormalities and less known skeletal abnormalities associated with known Zika infection of the mom. Finally, the weather in Akron, Ohio is currently about 74 Fahrenheit, 23 C, with nice clear skies and light winds. And Patricia is at University of Akron.
Right.
So I just want to remind everyone that at the beginning of every episode of TWiV, I say, hi, everybody, I'm Vincent Racaniello. Yep. I don't say hi, guys. I say, hi, everybody.
That's true.
Got it, Dickson?
What? Dickson what?
I said it too quickly for your... cod your ears, right?
I must have missed something here.
Yeah, it's okay. All right, the paper Patricia sent was published in Radiology. It's called Congenital Brain Abnormalities in Zika Virus, what the radiologist can expect to see prenatally and postnatally. And this is a study of a number of cases of Zika infection and congenital Zika syndrome in Brazil. And the point of this is to describe the spectrum of findings that are associated with Zika infection to help radiologists interpret their imaging. You know, if they see these sorts of changes, they say, oh, this could be Zika and so forth. Yeah. So they had, they looked at 438 patients to this clinic in Brazil. These are people who had a rash during pregnancy. 17 of them were confirmed to have Zika virus infection by diagnostic test. And then they did, as Patricia said, a variety of scanning technologies. And they, of course, they not only found microcephaly, but they had ventriculomegaly, a swelling of the ventricles of the brain, abnormalities of the corpus callosum, cortical migration abnormalities, and of course, and calcifications, intracranial calcifications. And as she said, the pictures are very sad. These kids are really messed up, and they have lots of brain scans, but they also have some photographs of babies. There's one photograph with baby with microcephaly, and you can see his skull tissue is too big.
Right.
This for his head, and it's all wrapped up at the top there.
Right.
Collapsed in. So there are a number of other... It's not just microcephaly. That's the bottom line of this paper.
And this, by the way, is in the northeastern part of Brazil, which was the area that seemed to be hardest hit in the Zika epidemic. And incidentally, the first author is Patricia Soares de Oliveira Schenfeld, and senior author is Fernanda Tovar Mal. Yeah, they're in Brazil.
I think there were some... I've lost here. Let me find where I highlighted this. There was one other point I wanted to bring up here.
And this article's open access, by the way. But yes, be warned that the pictures, a couple of the pictures of the babies are potentially a little disturbing if you're easily freaked out.
There were some cases of abnormalities where there were Zika negative.
Yes, right. That's really important.
They speculate about. Yes. They speculate about that. It could have been what did they say? Now, I can't find it here. Does anyone remember? Many pregnant women with a rash in Brazil are never shown to have congenitally infected fetuses, although some certainly could have less severe infection that has thus far been undiagnosed. For women who have neonates with findings suggestive of severe microcephaly but who have a history of rash, or for those who have a rash in the third trimester, we hypothesized that there was an unrecognized or asymptomatic first trimester exposure and or infection. That's what I wanted to tell you.
It is also possible that they didn't have Zika virus at all.
Right.
That's true.
Which,
the message that I took from that is that it is possible, at least based on this, that you could go through a pregnancy and have essentially a subclinical Zika infection that nevertheless impacted on the fetus.
Yeah, they also mentioned that cytomegalovirus rarely does
rarely have symptoms.
Microcephaly.
Oh, rarely does microcephaly.
Most patients with congenital cytomegalovirus, unlike most patients with congenital cytomegalovirus, the patients with documented Zika had severe microcephaly. Right. So this is different. So my reading is that you don't get severe microcephaly from CMV infections.
Right.
All right.
But there are other potential causes, as we discussed on the Caroline Point episode, that there are ways this can derail, and I think it is worth noting that this is, this is a place in the world and a topic in general that has not been looked at super closely the way it is being now. So some of the findings may be incidental to just nobody had ever really done these analyses before.
All right, so Martin in France sent us an article in The Guardian which references a paper in the British Medical Journal, and he writes, please note that only 2 of the 7 babies had antibodies for Zika. Can you explain this to your audience? Is this disease mongering? So the article he sent was in The Guardian. It's titled, Zika virus could be linked with a whole spectrum of disorders. But the actual paper that the article references is in the British Medical Journal, and it is titled Congenital Zika Syndrome with Arthrogryposis, Retrospective Case Study Series. So this is a study of babies positive for Zika who developed this condition of arthrogryposis, which I understand is
it's basically limb deformations.
Limb deformation.
Limb deformation. Okay, and they speculate that this is secondary to neuronal damage, so the babies could not move their limbs in utero and they didn't develop properly. They speculate on that. But it's an interesting paper because it shows you another thing that can happen as a consequence of Zika virus infection, right, outside of the CNS. And again, in a lot of pictures of babies with really severely malformed limbs.
This is in the Guardian, and I think it's more disturbing in a way in terms of the pictures than the radiology paper.
Yes.
Now, Martin wants to know why have only the 2 7 babies had antibodies, and whether we're fear-mongering here. He's written a lot about Zika fear-mongering. I haven't read most of them. And the reason here, Martin, is because they only looked in 2 children for Zika infection. The others, they didn't look in them. And then, so we can't really say that they were negative because they didn't look, but they had all the symptoms of it. So it's not really disease-mongering. I think if you look at these papers, you'll see that there's quite an etiologic association between infection and these defects.
And just another word for Martin is that I really think that your time is better spent trying to really understand the truth rather than this sort of science bashing stuff. It's much more satisfying.
Yeah.
All right, we will move on to a paper, but before that, I want to tell you about one of the sponsors of our episode, Curiosity Stream, a subscription streaming service. It's nonfiction, the world's first nonfiction service, founded by John Hendricks, who founded Discovery Communications, which, as you know, deals mostly in the real world, not the reality world. They have over 1,500 titles, 600 hours of content. You can get it in 196 countries, and you get it by, you can go on the web, you sign into their website, you can watch the videos there, or you can use your devices like Apple TV, Roku, Android, iOS, Chromecast, Amazon Fire, and Kindle. And they have a wide variety of science and technology content. They also have nature, history, interviews, a lot of stuff. It's all nonfiction, though. That's the key underlying it all. They have things like Stephen Hawking's universe, where Hawking traces the history of astronomical theories and technology. That's a particularly good one. I like that one. Next World with Michio Kaku, the future of technology. They do have some shows on viruses. One of them is called Viruses, Destruction and Creation, examining the spread of Zika virus, and many, many other interesting things as well. With CuriosityStream, you get real science shows, not reality TV science shows. There are monthly and annual plans available, and they start at just $2.99 a month. Less than a cup of coffee. Think about it. Next time you go buy a cup of coffee, you could have had a month of CuriosityStream, or a month of supporting TWiV on
Now,
Patreon.
we're not advocating that you skip coffee. Just brew your own at home, and then you can afford these things.
Yeah, a lot of people have multiple cups of coffee a day, and they go to Starbucks or your local cafe. It's fine, but it adds up.
Absolutely.
Right? Check out curiositystream.com/microbe and use the promo code microbe during sign up to get unlimited access to the world's top documentaries and nonfiction series completely free for the first 60 days. That's 2 entire months free of one of the largest 4K libraries around. Just go to curiositystream.com/microbe and use the offer code microbe at sign up. We thank CuriosityStream for their support of TWiV. Got an email the other day from a writer at NPR, Michaeline Duclef. And she sent me a preprint and then wanted to talk about it. And I said, I'm going to do this on TWiV because it's so cool. And here it is, Cell Host and Microbe. It came out yesterday. A multicomponent animal virus isolated from mosquitoes. Multicomponent. And there are a lot of authors on this paper.
From a lot of places.
And some of them have been on TWiV. The first author is Jason Ladner. And the last author is Gustavo Palacios, who has been on TWiV. And let's see, in between we have Tom Friedrich, David O'Connor, and Tony Goldberg, who have all been on TWiV. We have Laura Kramer, who was on recently on TWiV as well. So now someday we will look at a paper and say, all of the authors have been on TWiV. Something like that. Anyway, they're from a lot of places, from U.S. Army Medical Research Institute in Fort Detrick, the New York State Department of Health,
Texas,
University of Wisconsin-Madison, Panama,
Makerere University, Kampala, Uganda.
A cool study where they've been looking for viruses, clearly, and they happen to find in a number of Culex species mosquitoes from 3 different countries in Central America and South America. Would you like to know the countries?
Sure.
Trinidad, Peru, Panama, and Uganda. Well, Uganda's another one. That's later. So Trinidad, Peru, and Panama. Culex declarator and Culex coronator mosquitoes. They isolated some new novel viruses. They got complete genomes by deep sequencing, and looked like by the sequence analysis that these genomes were segmented. They're RNA genomes. And indeed, they are able to purify some of these viruses and grow them. And they did the old-fashioned experiment. They extracted RNA from the particles and ran them on a gel. That's the kind of thing that us old codgers...
This paper has a couple of really, really good old-school experiments that you just look at and say, yeah, that's the way to do it.
So when I was a student, we used to do this with influenza, extract RNA from the particle, run them out on a gel, and you see the segments. And here you can see they're segmented. Now, they got multiple isolates. They had 6 isolates, and they call this Guaiaco Culex virus, GCXV.
Because they originally found it in a place called Guaiaco, which is in Trinidad, right?
Yeah.
And Culex is the genus of mosquitoes in which they found it.
Mosquito. 6 isolates, and interestingly, some of these isolates seem to be lacking one of the segments, segment 5. We'll get to that in a minute. It turns out these are all single-stranded plus sense RNA genomes, so they're segmented single-stranded RNAs of positive polarity, and they have a distant relationship to flaviviruses. So here we have an all flavivirus TWiV again, right? Zika and Guaiaco-Culex viruses. So they do really cool experiment where they say, okay, do you really need segment 5 or not? So what do? You clone each of these 5 segments, then you make transcripts in vitro with an RNA polymerase, and then you transfect those into cells in different combinations. And they find if you put all 5 segments in, you get infection of cells in culture. If you leave out segment 1, which encodes the RNA polymerase of this virus, they can tell that by looking at the protein sequence. You don't get infection. But if you leave out 5 and put in 1 to 4, you still get infection. How about that? So apparently 5 is dispensable, and you see it in some isolates, but not in others.
These are in Culex cell cultures.
Well, they see C6/36, which I think you told me earlier was Aedes aegypti, right?
Did I say that?
Check it. Let's check. You did, but it's probably wrong, right?
I wouldn't have known that, actually.
C36/
C6/36, right?
C6
Aedes albopictus.
Aedes albopictus.
Aedes, really? The Asian tiger mosquito?
Apparently. That's what ATCC says, and I would trust them to get the cells right.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's interesting.
It's Aedes albopictus, yeah, not Culex. It would be interesting. Are there any cell lines from Aedes? There must be, right?
Oh, I'm
from,
sure.
From Aegypti, you mean?
Dengue.
Yeah, Aegypti, yeah.
So,
so far, this looks like a segmented RNA virus. But the next surprise came when they did a dose-response curve. How many virus particles do you need to infect?
Now, why would you do that experiment?
This is the cool classic experiment.
So why would you do it is a great question. Maybe you're suspecting that you need more than that the RNAs are separately packaged. I don't actually know why they did it, but they ended up doing it. So normally
it comes up anytime you look at a segmented virus. How is it packaging? How does it make sure it gets all of its segments into the cell? And one question would be: does every capsid contain all 4 or 5 segments?
Yeah.
Or is there some leeway in this, like with flu virus, you get enough segments in and that on average you're going to get it. And so this is the experiment that you would do.
You basically you do a dose response. You make dilutions of your virus and you count the number of plaques. And if you have a linear relationship between the two, you say this is one-hit kinetics. You need 1 virus particle to initiate an infection.
Right.
And in fact, they reference Flint et al., which happens to be our virology textbook, because we have a figure on this and explain, one-hit kinetics. And then on the same figure, we show 2-hit kinetics where you need 2 particles.
Like a helper virus.
To infect the cell, or 2 separate genomes packaged separately. Okay. And the line, you get a curve as a consequence. You don't get a straight line. Mm-hmm. And they do this experiment, and they find that you need around 3.27 particles for plaque formation. So about 3 to 4, I would say, to get a plaque. One thing that's very interesting here, I just thought of this morning driving in. We always complain about how small the figures are in some of these journals. For some reason, this dose response takes up the whole page.
It's big.
I don't know why they
didn't see it from over across the room.
Yeah, and it's a simple graph. I mean, this thing could have been 1/4 that size, and it would be perfectly clear.
Absolutely.
But. So, Vincent, is that a curve or a linear?
No, it's not a curve at all.
But it's pretty linear to me.
It's on a semi-log plot. The y,
yeah,
right. So it's actually a curve.
Yeah. So if you had plotted it differently, it would have been a curve as it is in the textbook. So I suggest that you need multiple particles. An idea being that each particle is packaging a different RNA sequence.
Now, I forget where they bring this up in the paper, but they do point out at one point that the purified stuff examined under an electron microscope, the particles are about 30 nanometers, which would be too small to put together the whole 12 kb of RNA. So if they had done that first, that might have made them suspicious that this was a multi-component virus.
So most flaviviruses are 40 nanometers in diameter. So this is a little bit smaller.
Yes, and a flavivirus genome, I believe, is less than 12 kb at total.
And totally not segmented also.
Yeah, these segments are the biggest segment here is 3,000 bases roughly, so that would be consistent with the smaller particle, yeah. Well, someone on this paper is probably listening, so tell us why you did this dose response. Be honest. Tell us the real story. So we have now a virus. They call these multicomponent virus, but basically each RNA is packaged separately, and you need to get most of them in. You don't need 5, apparently, to infect. You need 1 to 3 and maybe 4. And as they say, most segments are likely required to except for 5, to successfully complete a full cycle, but only a subset are likely required for transcription and replication. So the early parts of infection, you wouldn't need all 4.
So this is a virus infection of just the mosquito?
Yeah, we're going to get to that. This is able to infect mosquito cells and mosquitoes, but not mammalian cells.
This particular virus.
We're assuming this is not a zoonotic infection.
We don't know.
Well, or is it?
We don't know. It was isolated from mosquitoes, and then a similar virus was isolated from a red colobus monkey in Uganda.
I see.
Not the same, suggesting that they can be infected. So it remains to be seen.
The virus.
Well, they didn't try any. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
They didn't try any mammalian cell lines?
They did.
Yeah, they did.
It doesn't grow.
It doesn't replicate.
See, because I can't actually get this article to come up on my computer.
So they tried. They tried various cell lines. They also tried injecting newborn mice, which is a very susceptible mammalian host, and that didn't do anything. Okay.
Nothing.
So they say replication was detected in 3 mosquito cell lines in intrathoracically inoculated adult female mosquitoes, but no replication in ticks, sandflies, or vertebrate-derived cells.
Intrathecally injected
Intrathoracically.
Oh, intrathecal, my God.
That would be in the brain.
That would be a very small target. No, that's in the thorax.
Plus, the brain isn't in the head anyway.
Yeah, so, of the mosquito?
Yeah, it's subesophageal ganglion, stuff like that.
What's in their head, Dickson?
Not much. A bunch of eye, ommatidia, and stuff like that.
They do a cool experiment where they do fish. Fluorescent in situ hybridization.
Fish.
So they label RNA probes or DNA probes with fluorescent bases, and then they can hybridize them to infected cells. And so they make a probe specific for each of the 4 segments, and then you can look at the colors and see what cells are infected with which segment. And you can see some are infected with one, some are infected with the other, and some are infected with all of them. It's just a beautiful picture, which actually they used on the NPR.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny. NPR can use a picture from a paper like this, and I can't.
So I think this is another piece of evidence in support of their notion that it is a multi-component virus, okay? Because when you take a virus preparation, and a virus preparation, all they do is initially they just they pooled mosquitoes and ground them up and made an extract and threw them onto cells and got a cytopathic effect. Okay, so that's their virus preparation. Ultimately, as you say, Vincent, they cloned it, but they can use a virus preparation to throw on cells. And since you can identify lots of cells that don't pick up all of the segments and pick up different varieties of segments, that is used. It's a beautiful picture. It's very cool. But that's used in support of the notion that that the segments are in fact packaged in different particles, so that not all cells take up all of the particles. But as I recall, all of them take up like 1 through 3. Is that right? There are 3 of the segments.
Some of them are missing 4.
3 of the segments seem to be required at least for RNA replication, which is all this looks at. If segment 4 is segment 4 supposed to have the capsid protein in it?
Yeah, they speculate that it might. Yeah. So segment 1 is the polymerase. Segment 2 has some proteins involved in cleavage of the polyprotein, and then they think the others may have structural proteins. Should note, by the way, that 3 of the genome segments are monocistronic. They encode 1 protein, and the other 2 have multiple open reading frames. So interesting Baroque coding strategy here. So that's basically it. So this is the first multi-component virus found in animals. Previously, they've been found in plants and fungi. In fact, we talked not too long ago about a multi-component plant virus, right?
Yeah.
And at the time, we said, what's the selection for this? And it's still a question. Why would a virus, or what would be the selection for a virus to emerge that you need to infect with at least 4 different particles?
Right.
Exactly.
And we don't know. And it could be on Twitter today. The fellow from South Africa, what's his name? He does the blog Viral Bloggy. Viral Bloggy. Because I have to mention his name because he said this. Ed
There you go.
He said, "Why do you want to know what's the selection? It just works."
Yes.
Which could be it. Sometimes we overthink things, right?
Yeah. Did they look and see whether this is a vertical transmitted virus?
Oh, they did.
And
it doesn't look like it's efficiently vertically transmitted. What were the data for that?
I don't
remember.
I recall. I think they just mentioned that it doesn't look like it's vertically transmitted.
Well,
it says vertical transmission was not
right?
detected in our experiments. It's just a line in the discussion.
Virus was not detected in the larval progeny of infected mosquitoes, suggesting either the absence or a low occurrence of vertical transmission.
Right.
There you go. Well, they could be transmitted in a vertical farm, though, Dickson.
Yes.
That's true.
Okay, so that's that. I think it's very cool. And
cool.
The lady writer at NPR was pretty excited about it.
Yeah.
And she gave me the kicker in the article, which I love. I love getting the kicker, which is the last line.
You going?
And it is, there's so much we don't know about viruses, Racaniello adds, and with viruses, really anything is possible. We should always expect the unexpected.
Excellent.
Says.
He does say
and
that.
I should say, I want to tell you one more thing that Stan Malloy, he retweeted this, and he added something that's so cool. Let me just find his tweet, and I will read it to you. Let's see, what's the best way? Here we go. Stan Malloy, he said, like the old adage, if you can imagine it, it probably exists, with the addendum, if you can't imagine it, you need a better imagination. Isn't that great?
It is.
I love it, Stan Malloy.
That's a good one. Does this have any effect on the biology of the mosquito?
They say it seems to not be pathogenic. That's another thing they did look at here, Dickson, yes.
But given, if it's correct that this is not vertically transmitted, and given that they found a pretty closely related virus in a primate, this has got to have some other host. Right?
Probably,
so if it's not vertically transmitted, the mosquitoes don't bite each other. I don't know if it's a sexually transmitted disease of mosquitoes, but that seems a little odd.
Seems unlikely.
Alan, you're right on target. How does this?
How does this get into the mosquito? And the most obvious possibility is it's in something else.
Wouldn't it be cool if it had a plant host? Because the multi-segmented viruses show up in plants, right?
Yes.
Look at you. That's very interesting.
Do we actually know?
And the male mosquitoes are vegetarians. Yeah.
That would be
so
cool.
is the female.
Good idea.
They're both
Rich Condit. Very good. That would be cool.
That would be awesome.
By the way,
really awesome.
That'd be amazing.
So this virus, GCXV, has homology with a few other recently discovered viruses. Now they have a group called the Jingmen viruses, which all seem to have segmented RNA plus stranded genomes with some homology to flaviviruses. And this is the only one where they've proven that there's packaging of individual RNAs and particles, but it could be that the others have it as well. There are viruses, for example, that have been isolated from ticks, fruit flies, and there is a virus of Toxocara Dickson, which has 4 segments plus stranded RNA.
Which is a worm of dogs.
Yep. So these all, and so in that case,
that can't be a pathogen of
virus is infecting the worm itself, the roundworm itself. So there's a growing collection. They call it a clade within this. Within this Jingmen viruses, because Jingmen virus was the first example of this segmented flavy-like RNA virus that was identified. That has these segmented genomes and may all be multi-component. So it's pretty neat. which just goes to show, seek and ye shall find.
So one of the things I like about this is that it has, I'm sure it's had help, but it's made the news, and this is absolutely just basic fundamental virology. This is just plain interesting. This is, at least for, it's not obvious that this has any immediate health implications or anything like that. It's just plain interesting, and yet it has been found newsworthy, and I like that.
So is there a way to chemically link the 4 segments together so they can never come apart and see whether that replicates also?
Sorry, say it again, Dickson.
Could you chemically link the 4 segments of RNA together so they could never come apart? Would it still make a virus particle?
That's a good question.
You could certainly synthesize a nucleic acid molecule that had all 4 things in them, but there's going to be, in terms of the replication, there's all sorts of stuff going on with the termini. I'm not sure that's problematic. Interesting question. Question.
Yeah, it is. It's technically difficult.
Because why are there so few viruses that are segmented then?
Well,
I don't think there are so few. I think there are quite a few.
Plant viruses for sure. But
lots of. You're talking about the ones that package segments separately in particles.
Yeah, like this.
Maybe there aren't so many in the animal kingdom, or maybe, as Rich says, maybe this one.
Maybe it's a plant virus. That would be.
But some of these other viruses don't seem to be plant viruses. Let's go back to this table, which reports, the dog roundworm virus. It's not a plant. And then, of course,
is it a replicating in the worm, or is it just a paratenic host?
Don't know. It was just isolated.
Yeah, that's the point. That is the point.
We don't know.
So, Dickson.
So let me just tell you, Dickson. So it's been demonstrated 4 highly expressed transcripts isolated from a larval roundworm are actually of viral origin and exhibit homology to Jingmen virus. So these were picked up in a sequence analysis, and it turns out to be they're viral and they're part of this.
But in those cases, it's probably multi-segmented, but it's not clear that they're multi-component. So there could be some relatives of this that are multi-segmented and not multi-component. We don't know. Okay?
Could be.
The only cases in which the multi-component has been, even in this, in the primate in this study, I don't think that was demonstrated to be multi-component.
No, it wasn't. Only these Culex viruses.
So we have, in the case of the Culex viruses, we know that they're multi-component. We know that there are viruses out there that are at least multi-segmented or appear to be, that have homology to this. Whether or not they are multi-component is another story. Now, it would be interesting, very interesting, to have a closely related virus that's not a multi-component virus.
Right.
Sure.
And this may actually be an evolutionary step one way or the other, that you start out with a multi-segmented genome, and for whatever reason, there's some selective pressure in favor of smaller capsids, so you package your genomic material in those.
Or it could be that the evolution goes the other way around.
Or the other way around.
They speculate on that in the discussion.
Yes.
My takeaway from that was they seemed to favor the idea that you start out as one genome and wind up being segmented or multi-component. But, we don't know.
They fragment. Yeah, there's some experimental evidence that you can actually induce this genome fragmentation.
But, Dickson, the theoretical disadvantage to being a multi-component virus is that you need a high multiplicity of infection to
but that's something that could be delivered by an insect.
Exactly.
Right.
So then you need a low pathogenicity factor to to happen.
This has for the vector. You mean?
Yeah.
And in the reservoir host, assuming there is one, you just need a delivery mechanism that guarantees a high multiplicity initially.
Laura Kramer said that many viruses vectored by mosquitoes, which replicate in the mosquito, are not without cost to the mosquito. It doesn't kill them outright.
That's true.
So they live long enough, but it's not without cost of some kind.
Same with malaria. That affects the biology of the mosquito.
From a purely physical standpoint, there's got to be some cost of something robbing replication machinery in order to make copies of itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
All right, so that's a cool paper. Check it out. I'd like to tell you about our second sponsor of this episode, Drobo. Welcome back to TWiV Drobo. We did ads for Drobo a long time ago. Drobo is designed to solve two problems that affect hard disk drives. The drives get full, and they will eventually fail. And Drobo solves both of these problems. They are expandable. They use a technique where you can put multiple drives in a Drobo, and they all appear as one drive on your computer. It's sort of like RAID, but it's not RAID. It's a very different algorithm. So if you run out of storage, you can put another drive in. You could buy a 12-drive Drobo unit. Start out with 2 drives, and as you add photographs, you just add more and more drives till you get up to 12. Then you have to buy another one, unfortunately. So they're expandable. They're aware of the data that are on the drives as the drives get full. The lights on the front, which are usually green, they turn orange. And then that means you need to get a new drive, and when they turn red, there's no more space. You put a new drive in, it gets incorporated into this array, and you have more space. It's beautiful. It's redundant as well. You have 4 drives in there, or 3 or 2. When you copy a file, it's duplicated across the drive so that if one drive fails, you just take it out and put a new one in, and that file would be restored because it's still existing on the other drives as well. So it's redundant. It protects your data from 1 or 2 hard drive failures, and it's simple. There's a green light on the front. It means you got space. When it turns orange, you need to get a new drive. When it turns red, you can't put any more files on the drive. It's like a traffic light, green, orange,
and
red.
And if you have a drive fail, it also turns red, right?
Drive fail turns red, too. I think it might flash or something as well, do other things. Yes. So simplicity, it preserves simplicity. Is, as they say, if you can understand a traffic light, you can use a Drobo. And some of us have been using Drobos. Dickson had one from the last advertising campaign, which was years ago.
Still working.
Still running, right?
Oh, strong. You bet. It's still green, too.
It's still green. You need to take more pictures.
That's true. I do. I'll see you later. I'm going to take off and go take some photographs now. It's a nice day out there.
Alan has a one from the original campaign, and then you have a new one. You got a network-attached Drobo, right? And that's cool. We got a network-attached Drobo here in the lab, and I want to use it to share files. They have 8 different products, and which one depends on what you want to do. If you're a photographer, you need a lot of space. They recommend a 5DT or a 5D. Yeah. They have high-speed connections. If you want portability, they have a Drobo Mini that's 2.2 pounds that you can carry around. Has 8 terabytes capacity. It's got 4 drive bays. If you want a lot of storage or you want to back up, you can get a 4-drive 3rd generation or a 5-drive Drobo 5D. You can set it up if you're an Apple user as a time machine, and you can limit how much space is used for the backup. Okay. If you want to do network storage, the Drobo 5N is the one. You plug it into your switch or router, and you can find it all over your network. And next time we'll tell you about how people are making apps so that you could share your data, not just at home, but outside of your home as well. Twix listeners can save $100 off their purchase of a Drobo Mini 5D, 5N, or any 8 or 12 drive system. $100, go to drobostore.com and use the discount code Microbe100. We thank Drobo for their support of TWiV. And now we can we'll do a round of emails. Who would like to read this stream of consciousness email?
Well,
I
read it.
Take it. I'll do it.
All right, Alan, read that Mike one, please.
Let me take a deep breath here.
Please do.
Mike writes, what if our organs are like parasites that coexist inside of our bodies, sending chemical signals to our brains, making us do things or crave things that feed each one of them? Hence the saying, follow your heart. This would raise the question, what about the rest of the body? It could be possible these parasites developed individually in the oceans or whatever primordial soup existed in ancient times. As conditions of the earth changed, they formed bonds and developed a casing, including muscle tissue and bones for protection, a nervous system, and the brain in order to guide this one body they all now share. Each one of them sending signals to our brains, creating what we perceive as emotions or basic instincts, in some cases in order to guide us to feed them in a hopefully balanced way. This could be why wisdom in life is all about balance, because extremes don't serve our entire bodies. Though it's possible for organs to be phased out in the evolutionary process due to changing outside environments as well. Not only is our Earth a battleground for survival, but our bodies are just like the Earth and have their own environment as well. This could be why there are people who have control over their body temperature using their thoughts. We could easily be evolving to develop supernatural skills that give us more control over our inner environment. And they all start with the organs sending chemical signals to the brain. Your organs would like you to perceive yourself as a perfect functioning machine, and if you have trouble believing this, then the chemical signals they're sending are not going to work properly, and you will fall prey to disease. There are other similar microorganisms that are also parasites, quote unquote, that are fighting to gain the coveted position inside the human body. These smaller parasites and viruses can work against your organs and are an opposing force to an already perfect body. It's in our best interest to allow our bodies to maintain balance with some of these microorganisms or to free ourselves from them completely, as some of them are far too aggressive and can be a threat to our bodies as a whole. We are a habitat, just like the Earth, that has developed its own protective layer and created its own biosphere where everything functions together in unison and releasing chemical signals to the Earth. We may be changing its environment as well. We have to become like the better evolved parasites, such as much of the plant life on this planet, and develop a function that serves the environment in a healthy way. We have to use our knowledge of our own inner environment and the outer to create perfect harmony, or we will be phased out by the Earth, just like the unwanted parasites in our own body. Obviously, this changes our perception on the word parasite, because essentially everything behaves this way, aggressively fighting for a position within a favorable environment for reproduction and consumption. It raises the deeper, more philosophical question of, will it ever be heaven on earth, so to speak? If our bodies are still fighting for perfect harmony, how can we achieve perfect harmony with the Earth? Won't there always be other organisms jockeying for a position here on this planet and causing collateral damage in the process? Are we doomed to an eternal battleground?
Wow.
Dixon, what do you think about the idea of viewing your organs as parasites? That doesn't make sense, does it?
I think it's totally
pardon me, I just have to go take a little toke on something here to continue this conversation.
Well, I think it's just the opposite of what he writes. I think the organs listen to signals from our brain and the pituitary and lots of other signaling devices throughout to achieve what he would call balance, I would call homeostasis. But parasitic, I don't think so, because obviously you can remove lots of portions of organs, like you can lose a kidney, you can lose about 3/4 of your liver, you can take out most of your small intestines. You can lose half your brain. You take all that stuff out, and if you didn't know you had the operation, you'd swear that that's a normal person that could do everything you can do, and probably can. So the definition, it stretches the definition of parasite to the other direction. I think it's not a good way to look at this. What it really ends up as is an integrated, self-regulating system that uses huge complexities of signals of various sorts to achieve that balance that you were
So what you're saying, Dickson, in a way, is the truth is even more interesting and amazing than the fiction.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, that's right. Because we're still looking for more messages, right? And we're still learning the language of the immune system, for instance, and we're learning how connected the brain is to the immune system. The fact is you can control a lot of things by just not simple thought for sure, but biofeedback.
So the notion that there's a whole lot of really wild and interesting communication going on amongst our organs is not at all out of the question. But the notion that we evolved as organs, as a colony of independently evolved organs, is stony at best.
I think stony, yes.
As we, unless you're talking about kidney stones or something. So as complexity evolved, and complexity in this case I would take as a redundant system, so that the more you can do, the more likely it is that you want to continue to do that, and therefore molecular mechanisms evolve to create backup systems in case one system fails, so that you don't end up on the relic heap of extinction. And we know of lots of examples of that, and tons of genes that are multifunctional, but all relate to the same feature, like, for instance, myogenesis and that sort of thing. And I know there's lots of other stuff. Like, you could ramble on about this a long time, but I think that the essence of this letter, I'm sorry to say this, but you miss the point of an integrated biological system that's so coordinated that it functions as a single unit, and that's basically what
On the other
you are.
hand, if you are in a situation, now we don't know the entire diversity of our listeners, but if you are in a situation where your components actually arrived in 5 different capsids in the place where you now live and then assembled themselves,
segmented,
then this may in fact be a little more descriptive, but I don't think
we had a segmented genome,
I don't think the
just like
term
that last virus
organisms would
infection.
necessarily apply there, and I would thank the virus for listening.
Actually,
Exactly.
I started out by wondering what life was like on other planets. We couldn't lead here.
Right.
The next couple of emails all have to do with a paper published in a journal called Macromolecules. And the first is from Les, who asks, is this headline as much baloney as it sounds? And he links to a popular science summary of this macromolecule paper. And the headline is, IBM creates a molecule that could destroy all viruses. And yes, it is a little bit exaggerated because the actual paper, they've only tested a few representative viruses. And, they call it a broad spectrum, but they haven't tested every virus. And the drugs are very early stage. You need a lot. You need very high concentrations, so they're not ready yet. But, you're going from listen to the title of the journal article, all right? It's cooperative orthogonal macromolecular assemblies with broad spectrum antiviral activity, high selectivity, and resistance mitigation. So you get the person at PopSci, Claire Maldarelli. She said, oh my gosh, what kind of headline? And she calls the headline people, said, make something up for this. And this is what they came up with.
And I'm not, let's not pick on Claire too much. I don't know her personally, but the headlines are often generated by somebody who didn't write them.
Yeah, it's probably a
remember
writer. Yeah.
That's a misuse of a thesaurus.
I wouldn't have even written a molecule that could destroy all viruses.
That's a definite stretch. And the subtitle, "One Macromolecule to Rule Them All," is definitely
they just like to use
and by the way, it'll destroy the host.
So to be specific here, the paper, reading from the abstract, reports a general strategy to prevent viral infection using multifunctional molecules that are designed to have mannose moieties. That's a sugar. That's a sugar that compete with viruses for immune cells and basic amine groups that block viral entry through electrostatic interactions and prevent viral replication and neutralization by endosomal pH. So these are molecules that interact with surface molecules on immune cells or viruses. And as Vincent says, it's only been tested on a few viruses, and as I think it's the case that they're only tested in cell culture, right?
yes.
So we are like light years away from any sort of major breakthrough here. It's an interesting approach to antivirals, but I wouldn't.
Well, and the
say
reason
much
it's
more
only
than
been tested in cell culture is they're looking at EC50s of for Ebola 4.7 mg per liter.
Right.
Yes.
This is
Yes.
you're not
Yes.
going to inject this into any animal that is going to survive it.
No.
But it's an interesting approach. What they're trying to do is find and target mechanisms that are general to many different types of viruses, and then you could tailor this and hopefully find something that's a little more effective.
Right.
So the Sophie had also sent us a link to this article. William also did, and he explained basically what Rich has just said as well. And so that brings us through those emails.
Brings us to
Rich. Can you take Winks and Sue Ellens because they're
Wink
short.
writes to Stan Lemon, thanks for being the best lecturer when I was a Navy ID fellow and took the tropical medicine course at WRAIR. What's that? The Walter Reed
Army Institute.
Right.
Yeah.
And thanks for a great TWiV. These were Wink is referring to the interview with Stan Lemon, which was a great
Stan Lemon. Yeah, that's cool. Because Wink is a doc in Atlanta who writes to us often, so apparently he had Stan as a lecturer. That's great.
Sue Ellen writes, many thanks to everyone for the excellent podcast. I listen to TWiV, TWIP, and TWIM, as well as TWiVo, and enjoy all of them. I have a question that I hope is not a silly one. No such animal. I am wondering why, when people get measles, they get that bumpy rash, I guess I could ask the same about similar diseases like chickenpox, but what purpose does the rash serve? As I understand it, and I'm not an MD or a PhD or a virologist or anything like that, measles is a respiratory illness, so why does it also cause that skin rash? Just curious, and I know some of you Twixers will have the answer. And before we get to that, P.S. weather here, humid, scattered clouds, 84 degrees, summer is upon us. And she's in Roswell, Georgia. Well, yes, measles is a respiratory illness in that you acquire it as a respiratory illness, but it affects many different tissues in the body, including the skin. And the immune response to the presence of the virus in the skin gives you a rash.
So it would be similar for smallpox, right? Respiratory acquired makes it to the skin. You get a rash.
Absolutely,
as well.
And I think same
now,
for chickenpox.
For smallpox, there's virus in the rash,
correct.
right? Same.
Absolutely.
But I don't know if it's not always a way of transmission. You could if you got close to someone, transmit it that way, but it's got to get into either your blood or most commonly your respiratory tract. So not likely to be transmitted that way.
Smallpox can be transmitted from scabs, okay? And that's why that's why, one of the earliest forms of biowarfare was to give contaminated blankets to the Indians, which, had smallpox on them. Of course, you probably pick it up, the patient or the person who acquires the disease probably picks it up as a respiratory, inhales virus from virus that's on the blanket, but it would get on the blanket shed from scabs. Now, I don't know if measles is measles in those? It must be.
Yeah, it is. There's virus in there.
Well, and in fact,
But you don't shed it.
Right? The smallpox scab was the source of the first way to prevent at least the worst cases of the disease, virilation, which we talked about.
That's right.
Actually, measles contagion as a respiratory is probably one of the most contagious viruses around. It doesn't need anything else. Or if there is anything else, it's swamped out by the respiratory.
In terms of this question, the rash can be or cannot be, depending on the virus, a mechanism of transmission. It's one of those things that this is a side effect of some viruses, or perhaps a main effect of some viruses, or other infections as a means of transmission. But it's something that is generated by your immune response, and the question is absolutely not silly in the sense that it's a darn good question why some viruses cause rashes and others don't, because there are a lot of others that get into the bloodstream and that would be in and near the skin that don't cause rashes.
And I would say that generally, the symptoms that you observe in any given viral infection are usually immunological in nature. That's the immune response to the infection rather than the infection itself. That's not always the case, but usually. And I would say, furthermore, that where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah. So with another example, using much larger organisms, scabies, typically it's found between the webbings of the fingers, and the rash occurs in totally different places, and you can't isolate scabies at all from the rash zones. So it's an immunological thing.
Can you take the last one, Dickson?
You betcha. Hey, guys. Thank God that Kathy isn't here.
Kathy doesn't mind.
That's true. But a lot of other people out there seem to. I have to take issue with Alan's worries about digital data being in a format or whatever. I have to think that any situation or site that archives scientific papers will keep up with any format change! If you just look at what has been done on YouTube, I mean, they have hundreds of millions of videos, yet they
changed.
You asked me to read it as is, and I'm going to read this as is. Yet they change them all to not
Dickson,
run in Flash.
You can be a Dickson sometime.
Well, guess what? No, I'm just following orders here.
But that was the last email. It wasn't this one.
An archive service with much smaller file sizes should be much faster, and I have seen that happen over and over again with when formats change. I'm not saying that some very small archives may not be able to keep up, but even then, I doubt that it would be hard for them to change the format needed. just a tiny thing that bugs me.
Hey, Alan, do you remember the context?
Yes,
of this?
I've brought it up a few times with open access journals, which are often published online only. And the concern that I have with that is that we do not have anything like an archival format for digital information yet. Now, Gary, it's very nice that YouTube, which is owned by Google, which has more money than God, was able to update gigabytes or terabytes or whatever they have of video. And yes, of course, that's an important part of their business model, and therefore they did it. But you would think, you would think that important scientific data, say, I don't know, something from a big science project like the lunar landings. I mean, there were a lot of data produced from that. You've got to be certain that any computer files out of that would be archived in a way that's sustainable. You'd be able to access them decades later. And I've provided you with a link that proves that this is in fact not the case. It's just one example of many that I could point to. This one is lunar data images that were digitally recorded during the Apollo program going back into the mid-1960s. They were stored on the then current digital archiving medium, which was, I think, 3/4-inch reel-to-reel tape. And after, the last Apollo mission got back, they warehoused all this stuff and stuck it in a corner on a base and forgot about it. And in 2007, some people realized that a lot of the equipment to decode this stuff, which had never, ever been updated to any new formats, was becoming unavailable. Stuff that was completely commonplace in 1966 was now all sent off to landfills, or it was in the back of somebody's garage, and he just died, and we Craigslisted all that junk. So they really had to scramble to try and recover these otherwise unrecoverable data. And this is, as I say, this is one actually relatively tiny example of the kind of recovery efforts that you would need to get stuff back. And I think just about everybody can sympathize with having, looked through some old files or something and found a floppy disk and said, well, what's on this?
Alan, this is so funny. The tape drives were the size of refrigerators, and they were stored in a backyard shed surrounded by chickens. Oh,
and those were like the last
the resolution
ones available that you could.
They had a resolution of Earth of about 1 kilometer per pixel.
I hate to tell you this. That's why we're going back to the moon. we got to take better pictures.
But that's a project. I mean, there was no shortage of funding to update those files at the time. This was a huge deal. And now we're looking at stuff where people are publishing genome sequences and we're saying, oh, yeah, it'll get taken care of. And I just have zero faith that's going to happen.
This is great. This is like the FBI saying we would never lose any information. Right. That's why Apple should open up the iPhone. And guess what? The NSA lost important cryptographic stuff. I don't know exactly what
They're
it was.
Just human. Come on, give them a break.
If something can happen, it will, right? That's the bottom line. Yeah.
This is all true.
Wow, this is a great article.
So, Gary, I do not share your extreme comfort with it. All this will be taken care of.
All right, just one quick last email from Anthony. I was searching on Amazon to see if the price on the Fenner book had dropped, and I ran across this. I looked on the old TWiV site, and I didn't find that it had been mentioned. And he sends a link to a YouTube video. It's a song by, who is the group? I'm forgetting who this is. Radiohead, right? It's
Radiohead.
It's called Myxomatosis. Myxomatosis. And the lyrics are here.
Salivating,
I can't read them.
Myxomatosis,
Yeah. I don't know. Do you think Radiohead knows what myxomatosis is?
Somebody must have.
Are they from Australia?
No, I think they're UK, right? I have to look it up because
English.
I want to have
they're
people
from
write
Oxfordshire.
They're English.
Name themselves stuff like anthrax and, plague and, it's crazy. They don't.
It's okay, Dickson. It's art.
They don't.
Hey, they may know what they're talking about.
Okay.
There are some.
They may know, but we don't.
Know, but we don't know that they know.
Yeah, we don't know that.
We don't know that
one
they
of those
know.
unknown
That's right.
unknowns.
There you go.
Let's do some picks. Dickson, what's your pick?
Well, I have an interesting pick. This is all supposed to relate to the 404. episode, meaning that you look something up and it says, sorry, that information is unavailable. So I've picked out a song. It's played on a guitar harp.
Is that what that is?
I didn't even know what the hell a guitar harp was until I saw this. And it's Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd. And this is the song you play when the spinning disc on your computer starts to turn and the 404 number doesn't even come up. But it's an interesting listen. And the guy is very talented. And it turns out that there's a whole bunch of YouTube guitar harpists that have listed themselves, and they play all the favorites, so to speak, Stairway to Heaven and all the other classic rock songs. And this guy is really great. And it's wonderful music, and I really liked it. So I would easily listen to this while waiting for the 404 sign to
and
come
Comfortably
up,
Numb.
which it never will. Comfortably Numb.
Huh, that's pretty cool. Alan, what do you
I
have?
have a YouTube channel that I stumbled on just a little while ago, but it's been going for several years, I gather. A young woman named Sally LePage, who is, or at least was, I don't know if she's finished graduate school, but she was a graduate student in evolutionary biology. And she did this YouTube channel where she goes and does a lot of the stuff is video log, vlog type of personal interest. Or there's one very recent one where she's spotted a hawk and she's going to try and find the hawk. Then she has what drew me to it was she's got these science videos that are quite well done, where she explains concepts in evolutionary biology, and so you can filter through there and look those up. And I think the headline one on the channel is the tragedy of the commons, which is an important concept in both ecology and economics.
Exactly. Garrett Harton's.
Yeah, so she has a very good video explanation of that that's very succinct, and a number of other videos along those lines.
Cool.
That's very neat. All right, I'll subscribe to it. There you go.
Is she gainfully employed, or does she do this for a
think
living?
she is now. There's also some stuff. She's some creator in residence or something for GE. So I don't know. I think maybe the YouTube channel got turned into the job or something like that. And
It says she's a British biologist at the University of Oxford.
Outstanding.
So that might pay the bills.
I actually meant Aura Free.
Well, she was.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say
at least in the videos from a year or so ago, she was an evolutionary biology graduate student.
Rich, what do you have?
Well, my co-hosts who have been paying any attention, we have this Google Doc that we use, and so our pics are, this is for the audience, our pics are usually listed in advance, and sometimes we look at them. And my co-hosts will, if they've been paying any attention, will notice that several times I have put down an Eric Clapton video when in fact I didn't have a science pick, but science pick always comes up at the last minute. So the Eric Clapton video will happen sometime, but it's not really
I saw it before.
That's
I
right.
actually
It's
looked
come
at
up
it
several times.
A fast hand keeps removing it. Yes,
exactly. But something else always comes up that's actually a science pick, and this time, early in the this recording, we were talking about the emotional intelligence of animals, and it reminded me of this experiment that goes under the heading "Learned Helplessness." And I've given a wiki link to this, and just to give you an idea of some level of sophistication of, for example, a dog brain. Let me describe this to you, because this experiment has always blown my mind. Take just a minute here. So the experiment is to take 3 dogs and put them in a box where they have a collar on and can be delivered an unpleasant electric shock. All right? And one of the dogs, and in each of these cages is a little button that they can push with their nose. For one of the dogs, when the shock happens, he learns that if he pushes the button, the shock doesn't happen. For another dog, he can't. If he pushes the button, he can't do anything about it. He can push the button all day long and nothing happens. And the third dog is yoked to the first dog, so that that second dog is yoked to the first dog, but he gets the shock at the same interval, but he can't do anything by pushing the button. And the third dog doesn't ever get any shocks. So one dog learns that he can stop the shocks by pushing the button. The second dog gets shocked at random, same frequency as the first dog, but can't do anything about it. The third dog is naive to this whole thing. Then they take all three dogs.
Slightly different in the original version. The third dog was actually connected to the electricity and the button of the first dog. So the shock would end, but it would end randomly whenever the first dog pushed his lever. The first dog would stop the shock for himself and dog 3.
Okay.
And dog 2 is just getting a shock no matter what.
Oh man, we ought to do it. Okay, so then we
ought to do a TWiV on this.
What's the control,
That's
Rich?
why I said that one dog wasn't shocked at all, because I thought
they should have had one not shocked. But.
So then they put him in a different cage, okay, that has a different situation. It's got a barrier and a floor that gives a shock and another floor that doesn't, okay? And the dog that could stop the shock by pressing a button learns very quickly that he can jump over the barrier to escape the shock, all right? Another dog who's never been exposed learns very quickly as well. A dog who got shocked at random and couldn't do anything about it just kind of lies down and goes, "Oh God, not this again." Okay, so you can these animals can learn that they can't do anything about it. It's a great sort of traumatic experiment.
And then they extend that to assume that they can't do anything about any unpleasant stimulus.
Right.
So that's learned helplessness.
Right.
Yeah, people do that
exactly. That's the
and
point.
that is widely discussed and studied in the context of mental illness.
Yeah.
Hence the word oy vey.
Right. Cool. That's interesting. All right, my pick is a book. It's called Virus, an illustrated guide to 101 incredible microbes. Just published by Princeton University Press. It's written by Marilyn Rusink. And I say written loosely because there's not a lot of text in this book. I guess there's a lot of text, but it's mostly pictures of 101 different viruses and a few paragraphs about each one. It's kind of a coffee table book. It's got color pictures and little structural diagrams. And up front, there's a foreword by Carl Zimmer and a little bit on replication schemes. Dickson, how many different schemes are there?
7.
The 7 schemes are here. And
I just got an electric shock. That's how I knew that number.
Different. They actually have all 7 here, Dickson. That's good.
They do. Vincent, I have a question for you.
Hang on. I'm not done with my pick.
Okay.
And so it's actually reasonably priced. It's $35. But I do have 3 copies to give away. So stay tuned. I'm going to tell you at the end of this show, and just after the listener picks, I'll tell you how to win them. The Princeton University Press sent us 3 copies. They wanted to have TWiV publicize this book for them, and so we'll give them away.
Right.
We have 2 listener picks. One is from One Time.
Who we won't be hearing from again.
He or she.
No.
As we are all to be calling him Old Codger, it reminded me of George Melly and Stranglers.
I played that. That's great.
Yes, it's pretty funny.
It is very funny.
It's all about codgers. And did you listen, Dickson?
I listened intensely.
It's very good. Thank you, One Time.
It's my good ear.
Actually, this
Steve
book
writes,
is really good. Sorry.
How are you looking at it?
You can look at quite a bit of it on the Amazon site.
Yeah, you can get a preview inside it.
Yeah, it's quite nice. Colorful. Steve writes, "Hi, Vincent et al. This has nothing whatever to do with virology, but I couldn't help but think of you all trying to read this while I struggled through it. A masterpiece of a tongue twister I'm sure you will all enjoy. All the best, Steve," is from Luton, England. He sends a link to a poem about pronunciation.
I tried to read this.
It's called The Chaos.
It's Amazing. Alan, I would love to hear you try this.
Dearest creature in creation,
I would
study English.
I would buy the.
I will teach you in my verse sounds like corpse, core, horse, and worse. I will keep you, Susie, busy. Make your head with heat grow dizzy. Tear in eye, your dress will tear. So shall I. Oh, hear my prayer. Just compare heart, beard, and herd, dyes and diet, lord and word, sword and sward, retain and Britain. Mind the latter, how it's written. Now I surely will not plague you with such words as plague and ague, but be careful how you speak. Say break and stake, but bleak and streak. Cloven oven, how and low, script, receipt, show, poem, and toe.
He has no problem with it, Dickson. See that?
No, that's why he should read all the email.
It's quite good.
It's
Thank you,
an excellent poem.
Steve.
It's fantastic.
All right. If you'd like a copy of Virus, an illustrated guide to 101 incredible microbes, completely free, we're going to have 3 giveaways. Well, 3 different things. The first one, I think you thought of this, Dickson. Write in 200 words or less which virus you would like to be and why.
All right, that was yours.
No, it was yours.
No, that was yours.
Okay, I'll take credit.
200 words or less, that's important.
What virus you would like to be and why.
Right.
Send your entries to TWiV at microbe.tv. We'll have 2 other different opportunities. We'll let this run for a few weeks.
Right.
And we'll look at them all and judge which one is interesting. And we'll give you this book. And we'll do 2 others which we'll come up with, okay?
Can I ask my question now?
Sure.
On the cover, it says, what is the subtitle of the book?
An illustrated guide to 101 incredible microbes.
Incredible what?
I know they put microbes there, isn't
Incredible what?
So I think
Excuse me.
You can say a virus is a microbe. It's okay.
I don't think so.
Yeah. What is a microbe? Dixon, I'm in the Department of friggin' microbiology.
So why do they call it?
Therefore, a virus is a friggin' microbe.
No, don't freaking me.
Why not?
Why do we call it the microbiome? And then you have another word, the virus.
Because those darn bacteriologists keep screwing it up.
Yeah, and you've got another show called This Week in Microbiology.
Yeah.
So this is...
Yeah, we talk about viruses on that often.
Yeah, but that's fine, but I don't think a virus is a microbe.
You know what the problem was? They didn't want to repeat virus here.
Yeah, no kidding. I don't know why.
Right,
I know
Alan?
why they did it.
And I think they made an editorial. It looks funny, even though it's technically okay.
Misnomer.
What?
It's a misnomer.
Okay, well, you don't get a copy then. It's okay. I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
I have no problem. I would have picked something else. An illustrated guide to 101 incredible...
thingies.
Particles.
Entities. No, entity is...
Entities, yes. Infectious
Why not
entities.
an illustrated guide? That's it.
Yes.
Bingo.
Why do you have to have a...
They're zombies. Okay? We decided that they're undead, right?
Yeah, they're undead, but they're not.
Yeah, just an illustrated guide. That would be enough.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, you can find TWiV at iTunes, microbe.tv/TWiV. You can send your questions and comments as well as your 200 word or less what virus you'd like to be and why to TWiV at microbe.tv. Please consider supporting the science shows of Microbe TV at microbe.tv/contribute. We thank all of you who have contributed on Patreon. We are approaching 100 almost, and we appreciate it. And I know some of you are expecting mugs or books or T-shirts, and I'll get to it, I promise, before I pass. We'll get to it shortly. They're all in the development process right now, and I'm going to get them out. I appreciate it. We love your contributions. We do appreciate that you're helping us do more here.
Yeah.
Dickson Despommier is at verticalfarm.com. Thank you, Dickson.
You're welcome.
Are we going to do another Urban Ag someday?
Anytime you're ready.
All right. Let's do it next week.
Yeah.
Rich Condit is an emeritus professor at the University of Florida in Gainesville. Thank you, Rich.
It was a good time.
When you leave Gainesville, should I still use that? Or should I say you're an emeritus professor from Austin,
Texas? You can say
Texas?
I'm an emeritus because I will retain my emeritus status at the University of Florida, and I have significant loyalty to that fine institution. You can say that I am an emeritus professor at the University of Florida, residing in Austin, Texas. How about that? It's a little complicated.
Or you could say former Florida man Rich Condit.
That's right.
Sometimes
Former hanging Chad Rich.
Sometime in December.
December, right?
He says it's a little complicated, as if nothing else is complicated here on TWiV, right?
Are you living in Austin proper or Dripping Springs?
We're living in an area. The closest town is Manchac. We're near the southern border of Austin, just north of Buda.
Right.
Look, if there's anyone listening at the University of Texas, Austin, and you'd like us to come and do a TWiV, we could all come.
Yeah.
When Rich has moved, of course, that way we don't have to pay for him to travel.
I've already been in touch with Chris Sullivan, who was our host for a TWiV there previously, and I'm sure that I will be dropping in on them from time to time. I look forward to it.
But I want to do one not in the university. I want to do one in public somewhere.
Sure. Okay.
Austin City Limits. We'll do an Austin City Limits.
What's that? What is that?
That's a big popular musical venue.
We'll sell it out.
We would. We would.
Sell it out. Alan Dove is at alandove.com. He's also on Twitter as Alan Dove. Thank you, Alan.
It's always a pleasure.
And I think you actually sent Michaeline my way.
I did.
Twitter
yes, she was asking.
Yeah, you did. She listened to you. So this is funny. She said, I needed someone to talk about viruses with this story. And Alan said, check out the world's virology professor.
Yes, check out Prof. VRR, the Earth's virology professor.
Earth's virology. And someone else said, check for viruses, you should ask Carl Zimmer. And she said,
what?
Sorry, I need a scientist. I hope I'm not offending you, Carl. And he said, no problem. And I'm thinking, he probably doesn't even want to be a scientist right now in these times. Anyway, thank you, Alan.
Sure. Yes.
Always a pleasure. I am Vincent Racaniello, and you can find me at my blog, virology.ws. I'm also on Twitter, Prof. VRR. I would like to thank the sponsors of today's episode, CuriosityStream and Drobo. Thank you very much for your support of TWiV, and of course, as I said, all of you who are contributing on Patreon. You've been listening to This Week in Virology. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. Another TWiV is viral.